We're continuing here on page Yud Gimel, and we're talking about the Haktorah, the actual burning of the komets, and of course the Levona, in cases where there is Levona. And there's a machlokes here about how to do the Haktorah. And according to the Chachamim, the Haktorah itself requires a kli sharetz. Whereas Rabbi Shimon, if you recall from yesterday, allows the Kohen to take the komets from his hand and directly putting it on the Eish of the Mizbeach. We don't require a kli sharetz for Haktoras HaMincha, for the Haktorah of the komets or the Levona. Now, it's not 100% clear in the Gemara as to whether Rav Shimon actually rejects this requirement of kli sharetz. According to one school of thought, which is headed up by Rabbi Yehuda Bered Reb Chia, Rabbi Shimon rejects the Chachamim. He holds that the avoda of Haktorah is kshera, o b'kli, o biyad. You don't need a kli sharetz. Of course, if he does the Haktorah with his yad, then he needs yamin. He's got to use his right hand, like any avoda that has to be done with the right hand. If, on the other hand, he's maktir the komets with a kli, he doesn't have to use his right hand. He could hold the kli in his left hand, that's fine. And that's one approach to understand Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon rejects the absolute critical requirement of the Chacham of Kli. He has another option of Yad. And Rabbi Yanai in the Gemara says, no, that there's another possibility with regard to Reb Shimon. Again, there's one possibility that Reb Shimon never argued with the Chacham, but Rabbi Yanai comes up with a more extreme position, Lakula, of Rabbi Shimon. Ein Haktorah tricha lo yad v'lo kli sharetz. In other words, you can do with a kli that doesn't qualify according to the laws of Kodshim as a kli sharetz. For example, kli cheres. Kli sharetz is never made out of cheres, out of pottery. He could take a kli cheres, put the komets inside a piece of pottery of earthenware, and then bring and pour the komets onto the Eish of the Mizbeach with pottery, with earthenware. So that according to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon was allowing yad or kli. Obviously, kli means a kli sharetz. According to Rabbi Yanai, he's interpreting Rabbi Shimon as not requiring neither yad nor a kli sharetz. And the third option is, for example, a kli cheres, which doesn't qualify as a kli sharetz. Another option he has is called hemnayu. Hemnayu is an Aramaic word for avneit. Avneit is a belt which is made out of whatever material it's made out of, but certainly it's not a kli as far as kli sharetz is concerned. And he can pour the komets into his avneit, carry the avneit with the komets in it onto the mizbeach, and then do the Haktorah. We don't even have a kli sharetz. Now, obviously, according to Rabbi Yanai, in his understanding of Shimon, we have to assume that originally, when he did the Maisa Kmitza, he took the solas out of a kli sharetz. And the kmitza ended up back in the kli sharetz. He can take the kli sharetz, take the komet out of the kli sharetz and do the Haktorah according to Shimon without a kli sharetz. But initially there was a kiddush of a kli sharetz on the first round. Now at this point, he quotes a chiddush of the Rambam. And the Rambam says that even according to Chachamim, there are two parts to Haktorah, one of which will require a Klisharis, the other does not. What are the two parts of Haktorah of Komets? One is getting the Komets onto the Mizbech. That's called Halal Gabi Mizbech. The other is Nesinas HaKomets Al Ha'esh, taking the Komets from the top of the Mizbech and placing it on the Eish, or throwing it on into the fire. According to the Rambam, when the Chachamim required a Kli Sharis, that's only for stage number one, to get the Komets on top of the Mizbeach, Halah al Gabi Mizbeach. That has to be done by carrying the Komets in a Kli Sharis. Aval Zrikas HaKomets al Ha'ishim, Shera, Bein Biyadu, Bein B'Kli. I mean, the Rambam is really whittling down the machlokas here between the Rabbanon and Reb Shimon. We assume that the Rabbanon would require a Kli Sharis in Haktoras HaKomets from A to Z, from beginning soup to nuts. And Reb Shimon says, no, you could do it biyad, or maybe even in a Kli that's not a Kli Sharis. But now we are narrowing the gap between Rabbanan and Reb Shimon according to the Rambam. Was saying no. Even the Rabbanan agree that you could do Haktor biyad if it means taking it from the Rosh HaMizbeach and pouring it or throwing it onto the Eish. That does not require, even according to the Rabbanan, a Kli Sharis. Be done biyad. Where do the Chacham disagree with Rabbi Shimon and require a Kli Sharis? That's only to get the Komets onto the Mizbeach, Halal Gabi Mizbeach. Now, the next Rambam, which he's going to quote, is a little bit beyond my comprehension, meaning I can tell it over to you, but I'm not sure I understand why the Rambam would say such a thing. We have two categories of menachos. We have, for example, a minchas chote or a minchas kohen. It's kulo kolin. It's like a carbon oil. And the entire solace of the mincha, from beginning to end, is completely burnt on the mizbech. There's no such thing as shirayim, which is mutter to zichrei kahuna. So the Rambam is going to tell us now an unbelievable chiddush that menachos olil, those menachos which are completely burnt on the mizbeach, is ein tzricham laktir mikli sharis. We only need a kli sharis when it's komets, and the rest of the, or let's call it the balance of the solas is shirayim that's nechel zichrei kahuna. In such a case that you're doing a maisak Torah on the komets and only exclusively on the komets, then the Rabbana require a kli sharis. But if, says the Rambam, there is no specific limitation as far as Haktorah is concerned to the komets, but rather the entire mincha requires Haktorah, then you don't need a kli sharis because you're not specifying any part of this mincha. It's the entire mincha. And this is the Rambam in Psuli Kodshim, Perek Gimel Loch Chavdal. Let's go on. We discussed, if you recall, placing half of the komets in one kli and the other half in another kli. And we said that that was a problem. Again, you can combine it later on, if you recall. That was at our discussion yesterday. What about Haktoras HaKomets? The entire komets is in one kli. That's not a problem. But can he do the Haktara piecemeal? Start with Mechza and do Mechza of the Komets at time T1, and at time T2, burn the balance of the Komets, the Shirayim of the Komets. And this is a Mishnah in Masechta Menachos Adaf Chavav. And the Mishnah is lenient. And it says, Efshala Haktiras HaKometz L'Chatzoin. Chatzi Kometz, B'chol Aktoritz. You have a Torah of a Chatzi Kometz and a second Aktor. How far does that go? Can I divvy it up into 10 little pieces? You know, the Kometz is not that large of a volume. Is Nechluku Aburoy. L'das Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Efshala Haktir Rak Shtei Pa'amin, V'lo Yoser Mikach. You can only divide the komets into two and do two aktaras, one with mechza and the other with mechza. And the reason for that is, what's special about the number two? You're allowing two aktaros for one mincha, for one komet, by splitting the komets, but you're not allowing three. And the answer is, Mishum shakomets uchnei kizes. The volume of the komets is 2 kizes. And the shita of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is that ein haktara pchusa mikizayis. We cannot be maktir anything on the mizbech unless it has a shear of kizayis, meaning the achila of the mizbech is a reflection, a mirror image of the achilas adam. And just like achilas adam requires a kizayis, so to achilas mizbech requires a kizayis. You're not allowed to put on the eish on the mizbeach something that's less than a kizayis. It's like an insult to the mizbeach. So since the komets is 2 zaysim, he can split the komets into mechza, and he can do aktorah, says Rabbi Yeshua, of a kizayis, and then another aktorah of a kizayis. That's fine. The moment you take 2 kizesim and divide it into 3, however, it means that not one of these haktaros is a kizayis, because the komets is only 2 kizesim. You split it down into 3 parts, and we have a rule: ein haktara pchusa mikizayis. The das of Yochanan. Efshal haktir gav harbe piyamim. V'yesh haktar b'pachos mikizayis. So Yochanan says the sky's the limit. Take the 2 kizesim of the komets, split it up over and over and over again. It's like, taking a lizard and you keep cutting it and it keeps moving around. You get from one lizard, you get 10 lizards. Take the komets of 2 kizesim, divide it up into parts, and be marked to these smaller parts. Why? Because yesh aktar b'pachos mikizayis. So we have a fundamental machlokas, and this has repercussions throughout Kodshim. According to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, ein haktara pchusa mikizayis, and therefore the maximum number of haktaras you can have in mincha would have to be 2 and not more than 2. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan holds efshal lahaktir arbe pa'amin yesh haktara pachos mikizayis. Okay, Rabotai, now we get to the next stage in our discussion of Menachos. And by way of introduction, we quote a pasuk, which is a very famous pasuk in Kodshim, by Yikra Gimel. And the Torah, Vayikra Beis, and the Torah says, Kol korbanecha uminchasecha b'melach timlach, lo tashmis melach bris elokecha mi'al minchasecha, kol korbanecha takriv melach. Whatever you bring on the mizbeach has to come with an accompaniment of salt. So for those of you who like salt, you're in good company, because the mizbeach likes salt as well. not to oversalt. We now have the komets on top of the mizbech. We're about to put it into the H to be matir in the marocha. First, yesh l'mloch some kodem aktar. The requirement of al kol korbanecha takriv melach applies to menachas as well. It's not just limited to zavachim. Now, it doesn't tell you exactly how much salt you need, but what you need is that the komets be salted. What about the rest of the solas? That's eaten with zichrei kahuna. That's not achilas mizbeach, and we don't add any salt. Now, we mentioned that there are certain menachos that are kolil, kulay kolil on the mizbeach. We'll give examples: minchas kohanim or minchas nisachim. In this case, since the aktar is on the entire korban, the entire mincha, you will require melach on the entire mincha. And therefore, minchas kohanim u minchas nesachim shemukteres kula yesh lemlachas kula kodem ha'aktar. You need malicha on the entire korban because it's a minchas kohanim or a minchas nesachim, and it's kulo kol, completely burnt on the mizbech. You have to add salt on every part of the mincha. L'chatchil yesh l'mloach b'melach stomus udak. What is melech stomus? Melech stomus, you've been to Yam HaMelach, right? You know, in English we call it the Dead Sea. In Hebrew, we call it the salty sea. I mean, you've seen, if you go, you have to be very careful not to get hurt because the salt is very sharp. It's like a glacier of salt underneath the water. So you got to be very careful. So that's called Melech Sdomus, because the Dead Sea, or we'll call it the salty sea, is right near Sdom. But the truth is that there's no halacha of requiring melech from Sdom, from the Yam HaMelach. Any yam would be fine, but it's hard to salt any yam. In the case of Yam HaMelach, that's a good example here in Eretz Yisrael of, of gathering together melech. Now, you know that you could mine salt from the ground. Not all salt is acquired from the body of water, from a yam, a salty sea. So if you get salt from the adama, from the ground, that's called melech isterokines. It has a different word, a Greek word. Melech sheyotze me'adama. And that's very thick salt. So although the mitzvah of kol karbanecha minchasecha timloch is to use salt from the Dead Sea, however, no problem if you don't find Dead Sea salt, then you can use isteropis. Melech Melach sheyotze me'adama hu ova. It's a very thick kind of. Now, what happens if he brings a mincha without adding salt? Mincha ma'keves v'hechshav mincha imlo nimcha psula. The Gemara Menachos on Daf Chaf establishes that without mincha, it's possible. Whereas Rav Yosef says that, you know what? This is a machlokes tanoim. It's not simple. You can't just, rattle it off and say, well, every mincha without melach is possible. No. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon are quoted in the Brisa, and they maintain that position that we mentioned before, that the melach is critical. Avol lidas ha-mishnah ein ha-malicha ma'keves. So there's an anonymous Tana, we don't know who he is, says Rabbi Yosef, and he's the author of the Mishnah, and he holds ein ha-malicha ma'keves. And again, if we had time, we would have to investigate that. What do you mean, Ein Amalicha Ma'keves? Is that so in Zvachim? Now, on that Mishnah, on Daf Yud Ches, in Masechta Menachos, there's a comment of the Bar Tanura. The Bar Tanura is the, the premier commentary on the Mishnah. It says, Yesh chiyuv limloch es ha-mincha kula, v'rak al mincha zu, omra ha-mishnah she'ena ma'kebes, aval melichas ha-kometz me'akebes. The breakthrough here of the Bar Tanura is that there are two categories, two dinim of malicha. There's malichas chometz, and there's malichas shar hamincha in the case of minchas nesachim or minchas kohen. And even though we require malicha not only on the comments, but also in the case of a mincha nekteres kula kolil, we require malicha melach to be added to the entire mincha, which is going to go on to the mizbeach. Nevertheless, they're two different din. The din and the requirement of malicha in a case of a mincha hanikteres kolil, that's only l'chatchila. But in the case of a comment, in all menachos, everybody would agree that melach is critical. Without melach, it's possible. Now, who has to shell out for the melach? Baal mincha, does he have to dig into his pocket to pay for the melach? Or is it Mishal Tzibur? We can draw the funds from the communal chest, from the Trumas HaLishka, and buy the melach. He says, Baal mincha eino tzorch lahavi yachad ima es hamelach. The Baal mincha does not have to bring with him the melach. In other words, he doesn't have to sign a check for the melach. I don't know how expensive the melach is, but anyway. But hu mishal tzibur, we're allowed to siphon off money from the community chest for the sake of the melach. Now, Rabbosai, we're about to begin what I call a major branch in menachos, and that's called psulei menachos. And we're going to talk about 17 different categories of psulei menachos. So if you're getting a headache from so many disqualifications that are possible in a mincha, this is where you're holding. So we're not going to start that today. I'll just mention to you the 17 very quickly. First of all, we have to do with the Kohanim who do the avoda. Number one, we're going to talk about Yad Smol, Yeshiva, Chatzitza. All right, you know what? I don't think we gain anything by reading through this list. We'll see it tomorrow. And we're going to have to go through each one of these 17 psulim that apply to menachos. Okay, then? So let's just make a note of where we get up to here. Oops, made a mistake. Okay.